Pete blushed. No, it's fine, Mummy. Nora chuckled softly and said, Cherry's a big girl now? Pete ran out of the bathroom in a hurry after she put him down. He stood outside the door and listened to the movements inside. The running water, his mum in the bath, and then the sounds of her walking around in her slippers. After confirming she had put her nightclothes on, he opened the door and saw her lying on the bed. With her eyes closed, she said, Mummy has a very important operation in 2 days, Cherry. I need a crazy amount of sleep, so I'm going to bed now, okay? Okay, Mummy. His sister had told him that Mummy had poor health, and her hobby was sleeping. He knew she needed to sleep a lot, and that he mustn't disturb her if she had to prepare for an important operation. 2 minutes later, he heard steady breathing coming from the bed, and he tiptoed over to his mother. He climbed onto the bed, found a spot in Nora's arms, and curled up close to her. Before he knew it, he'd fallen into a deep sleep listening to her heartbeat. This is wonderful, he thought sleepily as he drifted off. I have a mum at last. He didn't see the SOS messages from Cherry on his phone in his pocket. Help, Pete. Let's swap back again, Pete. I don't love Daddy anymore. Cherry sent Pete another message when Justin wasn't looking. Still receiving no reply, she gave up. She had no choice but to start tackling her assignments. She bit her pen and stared at the math textbooks, her face wrinkled as she tried to make sense of it. As she'd lived abroad and was still young, she was still learning to read. She couldn't understand the questions in the book at all. Justin sat next to her when he returned. It had been 6 months since he'd last tutored his son. He didn't know what he'd got up to now. He pointed at the simplest question on the page and asked, Do you know how to solve this? Cherry's big eyes were completely blank. Justin fell silent for a moment. He flipped back through the book to where they'd been up to 6 months ago. What about this one? Cherry shook her head firmly. Justin's eyes widened. He didn't get why Pete couldn't solve these easy questions now when he'd had no problems before. He was meant to be clever. The tutors surely couldn't have done that much damage, could they? He hadn't even read the question. Cherry suggested, Why don't we learn about history instead, Daddy? I'm really good at that. I know loads of facts. Right. Justin picked up the history textbook instead and flipped it open. Who was the first president of the United States? Cherry's eyes lit up. She raised her hand and said, I know this. Justin breathed a sigh of relief. His son might have fallen behind in math, but it would be okay if he was doing well in his history classes. But then he heard her yell, Tom Cruise! It's George Washington. Cherry blinked. Oh, right. I must have remembered it wrong. Next question, please, Daddy. Which American politician was assassinated in 1963? Leonardo DiCaprio. Cherry immediately answered. Justin took a deep breath and told himself not to get mad. His son had just started talking a little more. He mustn't lose his temper. He decided to try again. Who invented the light bulb? Full of confidence, Cherry answered, Keanu Reeves. Justin looked at his son, who was usually so solemn. He was so much more lively and animated today, but he couldn't help yelling sternly, Peter Hunt! Cherry looked up, her expression eagerly seeking praise. Aren't I great, Daddy? There's still a lot more I know. Justin reined his temper in. The tutors were the ones who'd taught the child all the wrong information. So what good was losing his temper with Pete going to do? He'd just be rewarding those awful women more. He said glumly, Let's continue tomorrow. Okay, Daddy. Cherry heaved a huge sigh of relief. She'd seen Lawrence poking his head into the room every now and then, and figured he probably had something to talk to her father about. She carefully climbed down and said, I'm going to go off to play now, Daddy. Justin rubbed his temples as he watched her run off. Lawrence entered the room looking concerned. Pete seems to be doing worse than the tutor said. If this goes on, he'll probably fall to last place in the assessments, right? Do you want me to contact some other tutors? There's still time before the end of the year. The Hunts held assessments for the family children at the end of every year. Pete had always been top. That was how they'd found out he had a high IQ. And now his grades had deteriorated so badly in just 6 months. Fury flared in Justin's eyes. Despite Pete's high IQ and good memory, he seemed to have forgotten so much. He had stopped learning, and his grades would suffer as a result. Justin closed his eyes and pondered for a long time before he finally sighed and said, "Forget it. Let's not force him to do it anymore." This was the reason he always fell out with his son. He'd placed too much emphasis on education. He realized now that Pete's mental health was more important than anything else. Even if he really had forgotten everything that he'd learned and came last place in exams every time, they'd just live from day to day from now on. He would pave the way for Pete's future. Justin, who was usually so bold, hesitated for a moment. Then he asked Lawrence, "Have you found Pete different today?" The abuse from the tutors must have been going on for a long time, but his son had never once mentioned anything. Yet today, not only had he spoken up, but he also seemed to have become a lot more cheerful. What was going on? For some reason, Justin suddenly thought of what the woman had said downstairs. How did she know that his tutors were causing problems? Had Pete been talking to her about it somehow? Lawrence was thinking the same thing. Could Pete have confided in Miss Smith? There's something about her. Pete trusts her. So many other women have tried to use him to get near to you, but none of them have succeeded. Lawrence couldn't keep track of how many of Justin's suitors he'd had to handle in the past. There'd been so many. He thought for a while and asked, "Do you want to give her a chance to get to know you? She does seem to have a positive influence on Pete." Justin paused for a moment before asking, "What's she doing now?" A hesitant look appeared on Lawrence's face. "When the cleaners went to her room just now, they heard from the nanny that she's asleep. She forbade them from disturbing her. Her aunt's life is still in limbo. How can she bring herself to sleep?" Justin's expression darkened. "A person who can do that is too selfish to be around my son. Make sure she doesn't contact Pete anymore." "Yes, sir." Lawrence was about to say more, but Justin noticed that the child had fallen asleep on the sofa. He gestured to Lawrence to keep quiet. He walked over and picked up Cherry, intending to carry her into the bedroom. Cherry sleepily placed her arms around his neck and said, "Mummy, I found my twin brother. He looks just like me." Justin paused and frowned. Justin stared at the young child in his arms. It seemed like he was calling out for his mother. The light in his eyes dimmed. Pete rarely asked about his mother. Justin had thought he wasn't curious about her. But as it turns out, he'd been mistaken. She must be very important to him if he was talking about her in his sleep. He felt a mixture of complex emotions arising. He carried Cherry into the bedroom, took off her shoes, and tucked her in. He gazed at the child's young, sleeping face for a long time before he quietly left the room. "Sorry I fell asleep last night. Did Daddy scold you, Cherry?" Cherry lay on the bed and read the text that had woken her. She sent her brother a voice message back. "Nope, because even though I don't know much about math, I'm awesome at history. Daddy was so impressed that he cancelled the rest of the week." Pete believed her. He said, "Okay, don't forget our plans today." Cherry was just about to reply when the door opened. Justin walked in to see the child he thought was his son on the bed, phone in hand, jabbering away. At the sight of him, the child turned off the cell phone screen in a slight panic. Then, with a guilty conscience, blinked his big adorable eyes and exclaimed, "You look even more handsome today, Daddy." Justin couldn't help but smile when he heard the compliment. "You're a handsome fellow too." "No, that won't do," Cherry corrected him seriously and said, "Handsome is used to describe boys. I'm going to be pretty when I grow up." She'd forgotten he thought she was Pete. Justin was perplexed. Cherry flipped the quilt aside and climbed out of the bed nimbly. Then she held his large hand with her own small one and asked, "Want to have breakfast, Daddy? Cherry Pitts is really hungry." Justin glanced at his son hesitantly again as they headed through to the dining room. The presidential suite was more than 5,000 square feet. It had 4 bedrooms, 2 studies, a living room, a lounge, a gym, a kitchen, and a dining room. While they were eating, Justin instructed Lawrence, "Get the family doctor here." Cherry ate slowly, so Justin got the nanny to look after her after he'd finished. He went into the study with the family doctor, who had hurried over. The doctor stood there, watching his employer's expression changing again and again, before hesitantly asked, "Is it possible to tell a 5-year-old child's sexual orientation?" During the history quiz the day before, all the names that his son had mentioned were good-looking, attractive men. Moreover, his son's wish to become pretty, and how he'd called himself Cherry Pit this morning, seemed a little unusual. After their strange elevator ride the other day, Justin couldn't help but wonder whether Chester was having some influence on his child. When the family doctor saw how serious he was, he replied solemnly, "Sexual orientation is often difficult to determine at such a young age, but if you have concerns about this, I can prepare a test for Pete." "Yes, get the test ready." Justin said goodbye to the doctor and returned to the dining room, where he saw Chester and Cherry huddled together, speaking to each other in low voices. His face immediately sank. "Why didn't you log into the game last night?" Chester was stuffing bread into his mouth and speaking with a muffled voice, but paused as he felt a sudden chill. He turned his head and saw his brother standing behind him, looking as if he wanted to kill him. Chester was so frightened that he jumped up from the chair. "Are you okay, Justin?" Justin retracted his scrutinizing gaze and walked in between Chester and Cherry. He said, "No one's living next door. I want you to move out. You can live there instead." Chester was confused. "What have I done wrong this time? Why is he kicking me out?" But he knew better than to argue, so he went to pack his things. When Cherry had finished her breakfast, she walked over and put her arms around Justin's leg. She looked up at him and asked adorably, "Can we go to the movies today, Daddy?" Justin was about to refuse, but the child pleaded with him. "Come on, Daddy, pretty please." Justin bent over and picked Cherry up. "Don't beg people, Pete." Cherry's big round eyes blinked. "Okay, but can we go, Daddy?" Justin reluctantly agreed. To make it up to his son for what had happened with the tutors, he'd already postponed all his work and meetings today. Since Pete wanted to go to the movies, he would take him. They picked an afternoon screening of a kids' film. Before leaving, Cherry secretly sent a message to Pete. "All set, Pete. What about you?" Pete replied very quickly, "We've already set off." Cherry wasn't surprised. There was no way Nora would have rejected the request. She was always sleeping, so she often ended up spending less time with her child than other mothers. This meant that she usually agreed to everything Cherry wanted, within reason. As she had to perform surgery the next day, Nora had slept all the way to 2 p.m. She was still feeling tired when she took Pete to the movie theater. At the entrance, she looked at Pete and smiled to herself. "It's just a movie, Cherry. Is this really necessary?" Pete had a mask on. "Yes, it's to prevent being infected by contagious diseases." Nora put a hand to her forehead. "And the shades?" Pete pushed them up a little and replied reticently, "They look good." "If you say so." After Nora bought them some popcorn and soda, she took Pete's hand and led him to the movie theater. Once they had taken their seats, Pete took out his cell phone and sent a text to his sister. "Are you here yet?" Right at that moment, Cherry was sulkily following Justin into the theater. She'd wanted popcorn, but her father had adamantly refused to buy her any, saying that it was unhealthy. She'd decided he was horrible. Justin intensely disliked large movie theaters like this. There were too many people, and the air felt dirty. But because his son wanted the experience, it wouldn't have been quite appropriate for him to book the whole theater either. They reached the seats on the tickets that his son had brought online. Justin's heart sank as he spotted the woman already seated next to them. The theater was dark, but she was so attractive he'd recognize her anywhere. She seemed very sleepy, and her eyes were almost closed. Her arms were comfortably crossed, and she didn't notice their arrival. Justin's expression darkened. He'd been wondering why his son had suddenly wanted to come to the movies, and had even booked the tickets himself. It must have been part of her plan all along. She was so cunning. And rude, sitting there ignoring them, virtually asleep. He wanted to turn around and leave, but the thought of his son's mental health suppressed his impatience, and he sat down, letting Pete go next to her. I'm never giving her a chance to get too close to me again. The twins, who both had masks on, exchanged a look. How were Mummy and Daddy going to fall in love if they didn't sit together? The movie started at this point, the theme song echoing round the theatre. It instantly grabbed Cherry's attention, and she started to watch it wide-eyed. Half an hour later, Cherry smelled the popcorn. Engrossed in the movie, she subconsciously nudged Nora and said, "Popcorn, Mummy." Nora, who was dozing off, picked up a piece of popcorn, took off Cherry's mask, and stuffed it into her mouth. Pete was aghast. His sister was going to give them away.
Please subscribe to the Pocket FM YouTube channel and press the bell icon for instant notification. Check out our channel for more such exciting shows.